Raelle Kaia, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I am so glad to have you here. And we got through some technical difficulties
Right?
to get this started, to get us both on camera. So it's really great to have you on the show. I have to say, what an amazing life you've been having. You went to law school. You earned a law degree there. You even passed the bar, which not everybody does.
Right?
You joined the Peace Corps, and you served in Africa in the country of Malawi. You went to be a teacher in Beijing, China. And then you earned an MA at some point in counseling. And among many other things, you're now an outpatient therapist and crisis response therapist at Jackson Mental Health in Medford, Oregon. Whoa, that's a whole bunch right there. And that's not the whole story. As if that's not enough, you're also an author, songmaker, and creative philosopher. So let's start out by having you tell us a bit about creative philosophy, because that seems to have had a strong influence on your intellectual development. You sent me some papers that you've written.
Yeah.
I was kind of blown away. Whoa, this person
Thank you.
really smart and very articulate. And you give some credit to creative philosophy, which I'd never heard about. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I came up with the name for it. And, coming up with names for things that don't have names is part of creative philosophy.
Okay.
And, maybe somebody else has a name for it that I just haven't discovered. I've looked around and I've never seen anybody talk about it. But in a nutshell, it kind of boils down to the sense that in philosophy, needing to channel the creative power to understand the world and to inform your understanding of the world is essential. And needing to express yourself also through your creative power as a philosopher is also essential. So I was a philosophy student as an undergrad in my bachelor's degree, graduated in philosophy. And about halfway through...
I was a philosophy minor.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah.
So about halfway through the program, I became really interested in symbolic logic, which was one of the earlier courses in the program. And I was really adept at it. And I haven't...
say that one killed me.
Did it?
Yeah.
It came to me pretty naturally.
Okay.
In some ways more naturally than any other subject I've ever studied. And what I realized was that in this idea of symbolic logic that analytical philosophy is based on, which is kind of the predominant philosophy in our culture right now, I'm trying to just really turn things into symbols, into ones and zeros, and just kind of manipulate them and see what's true and what isn't true. But what I realized was that system is only as good as the premises of the system. Because the premises are what you start with, and then you say, if I assume this, I'm going to come up with this.
Right.
But the premises themselves are not arrived at through logic. They're just there. So even in the context of symbolic logic and analytical philosophy, everything that we know or believe to be true has to be arrived at intuitively in the form of the premises. And so I became interested and inspired by the question of how do we arrive at these premises? What is the process? It's not a logical process.
Yeah, it's a closed system,
right?
Which is the strength of it, but it's got to start somewhere, as you point out, and that's really one of the conundrums of life, really, because if you go back to the ultimates, you're always stuck with, is it God? Is it a cosmic accident? Is it elephants all the way down?
Right. So at that point, I kind of broke away. I became less interested in the schooling that I was getting because I felt like it wasn't leading me in a direction that was going to lead to the answers I was looking for. And I became really inspired primarily by William Blake, the famous artist and poet. And I really got into his works because he really created like an entire mythology that he described as just basically channeling, that it was revelation. And this idea of art as revelation started to really gel with me. And I became interested in the idea that channeling a muse, which is what an artist does, let's say, is really the same thing, according to Blake's perspective, and it resonated with me, as channeling a spiritual revelation. And that this is the process we use to arrive at premises, to guide our way through the world. They just come to us. So if we can engage with mythology and art and imagery and anything on this whole spectrum of communication, this is how we're going to arrive at the premises that guide our lives. So that became sort of my ethos from there on, and it's guided everything I've done ever since.
Okay, well
that's the creative philosophy.
Yeah, it's fascinating because in your papers you capitalized it.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was a thing that you studied in school, you know, a particular
It's a thing that I'm putting out there. And
yeah, right.
I would love to have it be studied by others in school someday.
Sure, sure. Well, you can make that happen.
Yeah.
You do some teaching too, don't you? Do I recall
not
that?
currently. I have in the past. I did teaching in Africa, in Malawi, and also in Beijing.
Yeah. So in addition to all these interesting facets of your life, just 2 years ago, you became a transgender woman.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that to the extent that you're comfortable.
Sure.
I'll probably ask a few probing questions.
Uh-huh.
So we'll get into your experience and then your thoughts about transgender spirituality. Okay.
Sure, absolutely.
So if I understand what it means to be a transgender woman, you were born with the anatomy of a boy. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, more or less. Yeah. There are, you don't want to leave out intersex people who are born with some sort of kind of combination of anatomy. And they can also be transgender depending on, especially in the past, doctors would really try to push them into one side of the gender binary. And then they would give them surgeries and hormones and try to force them into that camp. And then they may find out that they're transgender insofar as they have to move to the other camp. They were pushed to the camp that was wrong for them.
Yeah.
So that's essentially, what it means to be transgender woman, is to be born with the body, with a male form of a body. And as I talk about in transgender spirituality, the way I really think of it and see it is as with the soul of a woman.
Uh-huh.
And that what your soul is what you really are, not your body. The body, maybe you bring into alignment with your soul.
At what point, at what age did you have a sense that there was some kind of a disjunction?
Well, I came to understand that I was transgender quite late. But I started to have the sense that something wasn't fitting for me in gender, around the age of puberty. At that time, I would think to myself, like, I would really like to be female. I'd like to be a woman. But it didn't occur to me that that meant I was transgender. I thought that if anybody thought about it, they would feel the same way. Because it was just like, it just seemed so much better to me and just so much more what would fit me.
Yeah, fascinating.
Did you repressed it? Yeah.
Did you share that with your parents or other people when you were growing up?
No, I didn't. It didn't seem like something that was safe to share. When I was growing up, like the worst thing possible socially was to be gay.
Yep.
And it would you'd just be bullied and bullied. One kid confided to a friend of his when I was in 8th grade that he was gay, and the so-called friend went around and told everyone, and then this kid was just drummed out of school and never came back. Didn't even come back the next day or anything. That was it. The last we ever saw of him.
Wow.
So it was like, to me, it was like, let alone, transgender wasn't really even on the map of what people were thinking about in those days. It was bad enough
Yeah.
to be gay. And
Yeah.
so I was like, that's not for me. That's not where I'm going to go. I'm going to play by the rules. And I didn't even consider the possibility of not doing that. It
Yeah.
just seemed too awful, too frightening.
Right. So it sounds like school probably wasn't a great experience,
Oh
at
no.
least at least socially.
No, it was terrible. I hated it.
Yeah. Yeah. So at what point then did you begin to more actively question and begin to consider other kinds of alternatives? You say it was late. Yeah. When would that
Yeah.
have been?
So it was kind of a long process. I would say it started when I was an actor in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I had always loved the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I loved the freedom of the sexuality, the freedom of the gender bending, and I loved the music and the rock and roll and just the artistry of it. And when I was 22, I auditioned for a local production of it where we acted out on the screen, or in front of the screen, while the theater's being showing the movie. And in the role, I was playing the role of Brad. And in that role, you engage in a certain amount of gender bending and wearing costumes associated with both genders and sexy costumes, right? And this kind of awakened something in me, I believe, in retrospect now.
Huh.
I loved it. It was one of the best experiences of my life up to that time. And then the next year, I moved to San Francisco. I was kind of just there, just kind of wandering. I'd finished my undergrad, just not sure what to do. And at one point, I was praying to the moon and thinking about this idea of past lives and having this sense of, in a past life, that like my spirit was female. And I was specifically associating with this with the goddess form of Gaia. And I thought that this would be a secret I would never tell anybody at the time. Again, I still felt like, well, but this isn't relevant to my life here as a human being on this planet. But I felt like my life was a chance for Gaia to incarnate in male form, so to speak, and just experience this other side of things. So that was kind of the first. So I had developed this, basically, I didn't realize this at the time, but basically a transgender identity. And at that time, it was really kind of a non-binary identity. I didn't really think of myself as male or female. I thought of myself as this kind of, I don't know what. I just didn't identify with that. I felt like whatever was going on for women or for men or with gender for other people didn't apply to me. But I'd never heard the term non-binary like this around these days. So I didn't even identify with that. But I felt that in my soul that I was female, and that this would just be my secret, that I would just go through this way.
What about?
Oh, go ahead.
What about sexual contact? Were you having any sexual contact with one gender or another during this?
I've always only been attracted to women all my life. So that was also confusing, right? Because there's this heteronormative idea that the normal thing is for men to be attracted to women and women to be attracted to men. And I felt like, well, why? That wouldn't make any sense. Why would I be a woman if I were attracted to women, right? So you get caught up in that whole heteronormative kind of thing.
Yeah.
Also, there's just a lot of pushback. And in dating, I was always trying to be this man for the women I was dating, and really couldn't be and really didn't want to be, and always hoping that they would want me to be feminine. And even the bisexual women I dated never really wanted that. after this experience in my early 20s, when I was in law school, I was a drag queen, and I was performing for several years as a drag queen, and I loved it. But again, I didn't really fit in with most of the other drag queens. Just seemed to be gay men. They were men who were attracted to men.
Uh-huh.
They were doing this drag as kind of just a cultural expression. But for me, I wasn't that. And I was like, why am I into this? Why do I like this? And I think it was starting to bubble up. And I got scared, probably. Again, a lot of this was just an unconscious process that I've come to understand later. But I just stuffed it down. And it wasn't really until I started my training as a counselor and I started going through depth processes to understand my own psyche that it really started to bubble up in an undeniable way. Even that took a couple years for me to come to terms with it.
Was that after the Peace Corps and after China?
It was, yeah. I went through Peace Corps. I bounced around for a while. I did China. And during that period of time, I decided, because I still had this feeling of I went to all this trouble to get a law degree. And even that, I think, was trying to adhere to some sort of like warrior or aggression kind of archetype, that you're encouraged to be when you're trying to live this male life.
Yeah.
And it just put me through the ringer. I hated it. I couldn't stand fighting. I couldn't stand the aggression.
Yeah, it didn't fit for you at all.
No. So I did some inner work. I decided, well, what I want to do is use compassion to bring people into healing and into.
Yay.
Yeah.
Good for you.
So
yay.
I went ahead and said, I'm just going to let this legal training go and retrain as a counselor. And once I did that, I was introduced to, the ideas of things like transference and countertransference. And I made it sort of my mission to like really figure out my own psyche so I could be aware of that process when I'm working with clients, and that I could be in authentic relationship with myself, because I wanted to walk the talk, that I was encouraging my clients to be authentic also. And if they came in and said, I had some trans clients right from the start, and I was like, yeah, that's you, bring forward what's really you. But I had to do the same for myself, or otherwise there's an incongruity.
Yeah, right. So how do you handle that now with, let's say you get new clients? I'm pretty sure if you're working in a public facility that they're not all transgender.
No.
And so are you does the question come up about your gender in those instances?
Not often. I find that, as far as I can tell, most of my clients don't know I'm transgender.
Okay.
And they never ask me about it. And I don't volunteer it. I do if I have trans clients, to help them feel more comfortable. And sometimes with queer clients that are cisgender, I'll just let them know that I'm also queer. And if they want to know in what way that I'm queer, then I'll tell them I'm trans and lesbian. But otherwise, I probably won't bring it up, just based on the principle of, whatever I want to bring forward about me, I want to be in service of the therapy that I'm offering. And it's not really here nor there. Whether I'm trans or not, it won't necessarily help. I don't necessarily know how they're going to react to it. So, although in my experience, I transitioned while I was at the same job as a counselor. And I was, it was one of the frightening things in my life.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
How did your supervisors and peers handle that?
They were wonderful. My supervisors were absolutely fantastic, and just really encouraged me and commended me for this. And my peers were all supportive. And so I took the leap, and I kind of just one week had to tell all my clients, like, here's what's going on. I'm changing my name. I'm going to be a woman from now on. I'm taking a week off starting when I come back. And that's just what's going to happen. And, if you feel uncomfortable with that, you can ask for another therapist. or we can try to process your feelings of comfort. And I was really scared. I was scared that people just wouldn't be down for it, that people would be upset. And that was not the case at all. You know, at the time I had about 25 or 30 clients, I think, and not a single one of them stopped therapy with me.
Wow.
One of them almost did. One of them, and it was just, we had our first session when I said, okay, this is our first session, and on our second session, I'll be a woman. And so she was like, well, I don't know, maybe that would be a distraction or something. So I told my supervisors that, and I said, yeah. And they said, well, why don't you meet with her a second time, talk it through with her, and see if she really wants to transfer. If she does, let her transfer. So we did that, and I kind of laid out the options. You know, you can either transfer to another therapist right now if you're sure that this is a problem. We can process how you're feeling about it, or we can just go forward with therapy and, you know, just see how you feel without processing your feelings about this. Or, you know, if you later want to process them, then we can do that too. So she chose the third option, just to push through. And by the end of the session, she was like, well, this isn't a problem. And so that was it. I didn't have any negative experiences.
Yeah.
I was so grateful and really surprised that I didn't have any negative experiences. But yeah, that was a blessing.
It is a blessing, and I really have to commend you on your courage to take that step. And it's kind of an archetypal step in a way. I'm thinking of it as a metaphor for all of us who are terrified to make a step into the dark where we don't know what's going to turn out. And of course, that's such a big part of therapy, right? When a person gets to that point. And so you're a wonderful role model in that way, I have to say. And it's clear to me from the story that you've shared with us and what I've read of your writing that you have a deep drive to be yourself, to be authentic, and to explore that as much as you can and take it as far as you can.
I do, and that really ties back into the creative philosophy as well. Part of my process coming in to the period where I finally did reckon with my gender and start to transition, I developed this concept called self as art. And basically, I had just gone through the period of writing several novels, and I'd been writing a bunch of songs. I had a creative birth when I was in Peace Corps, and just really all this creativity was pouring out of me. But the difficulty then is in our mass-produced society, you know, there's just like these tiny few slots for people to be able to share their books, share their music, share their creativity. And I'm not a self-promoter of any kind, and I don't know really the first thing about how to do that. And it's just not in the nature of my personality. I feel self-conscious and just uncomfortable. And so I started to struggle with this idea of, I've got this art that I want to put out there, and I love creating the art, but I don't know how to market it or promote it. And it's this question of the medium. I'm trying to put my art into the medium of a book, the medium of a song, or into the medium of whatever it is. And I realized one antidote to this issue is to recognize that I have a medium. We all have a medium, right? With us all the time, of the self. That the world, in our encounters with the world, is always an interaction with. You don't have to say like, okay, if you really want to get me, sit down and read this book. Instead, it's like, here, I'm right here. Let's just interact.
Yeah.
So I became inspired by this idea of self as art, as a form of creative philosophy, as a form of my spiritual process. And I also became inspired by this idea of marrying yourself, the self-marriage.
Yeah, yeah.
Because of this idea that ultimately we are always with ourselves at all times. Even if you marry another person, you're not with that person all the time. You know, you go to the grocery store or something, you go to your job, and suddenly, you know, you're alone again. But you're never alone, even for a tiny instant, from yourself. And it's a marriage you can't get divorced from. It really is till death do you part. And it can either be a relationship where you are at each other's throats, where you are at your own throat, or it can be a relationship that's a committed marriage based on love. And it says, I accept you, whatever you are, period. And we're going to go forward in love as a being. And anyone else that enters into my life in a marriage context or in a relationship context is going to be entering into the context of that relationship itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I went through that ritual, and that really brought to the forefront of like, whatever is authentic for me, I'm absolutely going to accept.
Right.
It was only a few months after that the gender transition started.
Yeah. Yeah. The one of the things that strikes me in relation to what you're saying about not finding yourself necessarily fitting into all the cookie cutter forms of artistic expression is that you described yourself as a song maker. Now, most people will say I'm a singer songwriter, you know, if they feel like they're doing both, but I've never heard anybody describe themselves as a song maker. So that suggests to me that you have a different sense about that.
I guess so. You know, for me, the writing of a song, you know, I write the lyrics of a song, and those are written in words. But I don't write in on scale, you know, with music notes. I don't have that. I haven't learned that language. I mean, I learned to read notes as a child when I was studying piano, but I don't write things out that way. I prefer to write my song and it's in me, and then I make it, right? Then I will sing it and back it up with guitar, and I'll put out the written lyrics, but the writing, it just seemed like making was more appropriate than writing, because I also create like a version of it that you can hear, you know? Yeah.
Have you put any of that out into the world, like on YouTube or anything like that?
I have a website, and I had posted all of my songs on that website, and then I went through the gender transition, and I had to, my comfortable range as a singer is actually quite low, and it felt incongruous to me to have this music out there, to be singing that low, to have versions of it where I was singing low. So I took everything down, you know, and I redid their website, you know, with my new name, my new pictures, my new identity. And so I've been in the process of re-recording the old songs. And so far I've only just posted a few. It's been a slow process, but this is an ongoing thing where I'm bringing what's out there into alignment with who I am. And that means a lot of going back and re-recording the new singing voice that I use.
Yeah. No, I'm hearing a little echo or something. Are you hearing any echo?
I don't hear an echo.
Okay. Maybe it'll go away. It's some kind of electronic artifact.
Okay.
So one of the things that I never thought about that I got through your story is that I think when we hear about somebody transitioning, that I had never thought about it very deeply and just kind of assumed that, okay, you've made these changes in your body because you weren't comfortable, and so you've made some changes, but you're still you. But what I'm getting is that there was a profound, not just a physical change, but a psychospiritual change for you.
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways,
you were reborn in a way.
Yeah, I feel like I died and was reborn. And that was a source of grief because I had a lot of love for my old self. And I didn't want to die. And I had put in a lot of love and care and attention into building that life. And I cared about the people who loved me as that person. And I was noticing when I started transitioning, I was noticing they were going through grief processes because they had some idea of who I was. They knew things about who I was that are an element of my soul, but they also thought they knew other things about me that actually weren't true. And then it caused people to have this sense of like not really being sure who I am, feeling like the person that I was is gone, essentially died, and like really leaving me in the role of the murderer of the person that they loved. And now there's just me left over, and now they have to either learn to love me as I am or just walk away. So that's how it started to feel to me. I still have the continuity of memory. I still have my values, my likes, my tastes, my ethics, that's all the same. But the way I talk, the way I dress, the way I carry myself, the way I gesture, the way that people, and again, this goes back to that same transference idea. It's not just in therapy, but in all of life. People are projecting their male image, their father image, or their mother image, their god or goddess image onto you based on whether they think you're male or female. And the profundity of like how this changes people's interactions with you is just kind of all encompassing, to the point where it really did feel like this is a new self. This is the old. I did a grief ritual, where I really honored my old self. I felt like he was the best man I ever knew because he died so I could live.
That's great. Yeah, that's such an interesting experience and a way to put it. And so other people suffer cognitive dissonance, trying to make sense of all of that. And you've had to work through that yourself. And one of the things that you have been struggling with is finding that the old religious forms, spiritual traditions, and so on aren't a perfect fit. And you are in the process of exploring and creating, like in your creative philosophy, creating what is the spiritual container for you.
That's right. And I've been at this work for a long time, ever since I started the creative philosophy. I really grew up as an atheist from a very early age, like at the age of 5. As soon as like somebody told me what God was, I was like, well, I don't believe in that.
Was your family of some spiritual orientation or another?
Not really. My father grew up Catholic, but he had left the church when he was like very young, and my mother wasn't really involved in any kind of church. She was quite spiritual in many ways, but she was a dabbler, in different kind of new age types of traditions, in just a general spiritual inquiry.
Okay.
And my father wasn't that spiritually inclined, but they didn't push any kind of spirituality on us kids. They just let us choose what we wanted. And so to me, when I heard about this idea of God as it's presented in our mainstream culture, this was equivalent to the idea of the boogeyman for me. This is somebody who's all powerful that you can't escape from, that if you don't do what he wants, he's going to send you to hell and punish you. And it's just kind of these really strict, arbitrary rules. And I just thought the idea was terrible. I was like, if that's what the world really is, then this world is hell. And so like the boogeyman, it was something I didn't really believe in, but I was afraid might be true. And that stuck with me up until my philosophy explorations and developing this idea of the creative philosophy, where I recognized that actually I don't know, that nobody actually knows what the truth of this world is. And so I became an agnostic at that point. And then I started this process of the creative philosophy to figure out, what do I really believe intuitively? And let that form my spirituality. That's been the process ever since. And as I've gone through that process and tried to integrate the transgender experience into my spirituality, well, it hasn't really been a problem for my spirituality, but it's been a problem trying to apply other forms and other traditions that I've drawn from in my own explorations. Because the the standard forms that's available to us in this culture don't have anything to say about it unless they have something negative to say about it. And so I really found myself without guidance, you know, even less guidance than I'd had before.
Yeah, to prepare for this conversation, you figured you better try to articulate some things on paper. And so you wrote a couple of essays that are on your website.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm going to draw on to help part of the discussion.
Yeah.
One thing you write, it can be difficult for queer people to find resonance with a spiritual tradition that ignores the most fundamental aspects of our humanity.
Yeah.
It's not satisfying to settle for mere non-oppression.
Right.
Yeah, maybe expand on that a little bit.
Well, this is kind of the dynamic of, let's say, coming into like a progressive church in Christianity that has moved away from more of the conservative idea that there's no place for queer people, there's no place for trans people, and has said, no, you can come in, we're not going to consider that a sin, and so on and so forth. But the religion is more than just like, we're going to let you be here. Right? A religion.
Well, some profess that, right? Oh, we welcome gays into our congregation.
Right. But what about the spiritual forms? What about the imagery? What about the rituals? What about the history and the rites and the whole mythological construct of the religion itself or the spiritual system itself? If it doesn't incorporate this idea of like, and queer people are valued, and this is how queer people fit in to this context. They're only presenting hetero and cis-normative imagery and archetypes of male and female and marriage and union in that context, then even though you're allowed to be there, you're still not, it doesn't, I can't speak for other people, but for me, it definitely doesn't.
It's like you can hang out here, but this is not really based on anything that really resonates with you.
Yeah, it's kind of like there's just this thing about you that's kind of weird, but it's okay. You know?
Yeah. So you've deeply studied feminist literature. You've gone into the pre-patriarchal societies, because you point out that most of religion is, at least in this country, is embedded in a patriarchal myth.
Right. And I would say not just this country, but in most countries in the world, the dominant forms are drawing from a patriarchal tradition. And that's why I think we see such conservatism in religious systems that are dominant all across the world. And it's really the earlier traditions, the more indigenous traditions, and the ones that the patriarchy supplanted, which were the earth-based traditions, the goddess-based traditions, that had a more positive view of sexuality, had a place for different expressions of sexuality as something positive, as something not to be ashamed of or to try and get over, but also in the goddess traditions, and there were a variety of them. They had different names for different goddesses in different cultures, but there was also a continuity of the forms throughout them in the ancient world, throughout Europe and North Africa and the Middle East and India. You had this goddess tradition that the patriarchy came in with technology to be able to fight imperial warfare, and really was able to conquer all these societies and set themselves up as the ruling class, so to speak. And that's become the foundation for all the powerful cultures and the dominant cultures now throughout the world. But those early goddess traditions, typically, like I said, they mirrored each other, and they would typically have transgender priestesses serving alongside the cisgender priestesses. And I'm using the terminology transgender priestess because that's in my understanding of how these people were operating and functioning and being in the world.
Not that they had
That's what they were.
not that they had any sort of surgery, which didn't exist then.
Well,
but
they often did. They would remove their testicles, right?
Okay.
And so that would, the testicles are the source of these testosterone hormones. It's a form of surgery. It's a form of hormone therapy. You know, it's a very raw, kind of desperate version of it compared to what we have now, where you can have medical treatment and have it done in a place of safety. But that's typically what would happen. And so if you do that early enough, you're going to arrest the masculinizing process in your body and be able to retain a more feminine appearance and a feminine experience of hormones within you.
Yeah. You talk about the planting cultures versus the warrior cultures, and the warrior cultures, the planting cultures were more feminine, I guess, by definition, right? They coexisted with this goddess period.
Yeah, archetypically to the human psyche in general, right? The goddess archetype is going to be equivalent to the abundance of the world that brings forth our food and our nourishment. As we all come from a woman's body into this world, if the earth can also be considered a woman's body in which life comes forth into the world, this power of creation is equivalent, metaphorically, so archetypically. So it's not that women ruled over men or anything like that. From my understanding, there was just more gender parity in these types of cultures rather than men ruling over women, which is what we have in patriarchy. So I would say it's not correct to say there was a matriarchy. It wasn't rule of women, but it was an attunement with the feminine power as the source of foundation of our lives. And typically these spiritual systems involved temples where there would be sacred sexuality, again, honoring our body and honoring the gifts of our body and the pleasure of our body, the joy of our body, just as we honor the gifts and pleasure and joy of eating food from the bounty of the earth itself, as opposed to the warrior culture, where you come in with a weapon, you come in with the sword, and you take what others have produced. So now, excuse me, this sword, this violent power, this power of dominance has become the active power in the universe that surpasses the power of the goddess to bring forth, because the goddess can bring forth and then you take by force and you set yourself up as the ruler. And as a patriarchal warrior figure, you draw your inspiration from a male image of another warrior god that also rules through strict laws and enforcement of laws, through violent measures, oftentimes. And this becomes a new hierarchical system of power going down the pyramid. And those at the top of the power pyramid are the elevated ones, whereas those at the bottom of the pyramid are the ones actually bringing forth the sustenance. So sexuality becomes something to be feared. This is the power of the goddess. So it's got to be something that can be resisted, suppressed. And so these are the sort of the threads that I've seen through the current age of the patriarchal forms that have resulted in religious systems that don't seem to have anything for queer people and seem to have forms where women tend to have like this kind of subordinate role.
Yeah.
In society.
You also find, I'm hearing this crazy resonance of my voice, or not resonance, but echoing. It's not all the time, so I'll keep going.
Okay.
You find, speaking of resonance, you find resonance in the shamanic world. So talk about that a bit.
Sure. Well, shamanic world, I think, has an overlap with this artistic world. When I talked about William Blake, and this process of art as revelation, this is part of what's going on in shamanic processes as well. The shamanic world really is the world of connecting with archetypes, and art really is the process of connecting with archetypes and bringing them forward. Just as you bring them forward out of dreams, the shamanic realm brings forth out of dreams. And when I started my depth process, training as a counselor, I went through a shamanic process where I worked with a group of people, and we were all doing a shamanic process under the facilitation of a shamanic worker. And I started to draw these things forward and was really coming forth with who I was through art and through image depiction and through embodied sort of channeling. The vast importance to me of my female identity. And that really kind of started the ball rolling. And once again, I kind of stuck it down for a while and then it bubbled up. But that's kind of how it started. So the shamanic process, the process of connecting with visions, potentially connecting with an altered state of consciousness, connecting with your dreams, connecting with art, it brings you across the threshold. And this crossing of the threshold, I think, is such a relevant motif in the transgender experience. Going across the pairs of opposites, traveling back and forth between the material and the spirit worlds, again, archetypically is equivalent. The one mirrors the other, and you start to feel the resonance with it. So that was part of what was going on for me and how I personally connected with the sense of resonance. And if you look at shamanic cultures, it's very common to find shamans who are gender divergent. You find some that go through an actual gender transition and live as the opposite gender that they started with for the rest of their life. Other times they swap genders for periods of time, maybe as part of their training. Other times, maybe just for a certain ceremony, they need to channel some sort of energy from this other gender, so they'll alter their dress and alter their mannerisms and so on and so forth in order to call in that power. That's part of what you do, is you embody the power that you're trying to call upon for the guidance of that spirit's benefits.
Yeah. Another thing that struck me that you talk about is empathy. You said that going through this transformation, this gender transformation, that it's the ultimate in empathy because you've been in both bodies. Right.
You've been in both bodies and you've been in both roles, and you're seeing things from both sides. And this is a ritual enactment of deep empathy, as well as just the reality of your life. When you look at the transgender priestesses of the goddess traditions, they tended to be healers. Some of the mythology involves them using empathy to heal certain gods or goddesses. And the myth that really stuck with me has to do with the myth of Guanyin. When I lived in China, when I lived in China, I went on kind of a pilgrimage. Part of the reason I went to China was a pilgrimage to visit the pandas there. I've always been inspired by pandas. I love them. And when my brother died young of cancer, and his last wish for me was that I would meet a panda in person. And so many years later, I finally figured out how to do this. And so I took this job in China. I went on this pilgrimage to see the pandas. And while I was there on that pilgrimage, I also found this park with these different Buddhist images. Just fantastic. It was in Lishan, China. I think it was called the Garden of 10,000 Buddhas. And one of the images they had was Guanyin. I'd never heard of Guanyin before. And it just overwhelmed me with this sense of connection with this image in a way that no religious imagery ever had before in my life. And I carried that with me. And I understood that Guanyin was the form that Avalokiteshvara from Buddhist mythology, the bodhisattva of compassion, had kind of morphed into. But I didn't learn until much later that there's actually part of the mythology of Guanyin is that not only did Chinese culture sort of pick up this form and decide to use a female form instead of a male form. But that Guanyin is understood as having been Avalokiteshvara and blowing up, basically disincarnating, because this duty of compassion that was called upon this being spoke into the soul in a certain way that the male form could not hold this compassion in the way that Guanyin wanted to hold it. And so Avalokiteshvara burst apart and reincarnated as female, as Guanyin. And when I heard this myth, I realized this was equivalent to the process I went through as a counselor. That I went into counseling, I found that people were projecting male archetypes onto me. And that part of the projection of that archetype was some discomfort if I was too just like, oh, nice, and just like soothing and nurturing, just what was natural for me. I couldn't really do because it would interfere with people's father image in a way that they would be uncomfortable with. I would find that people wanted me to be more kind of like, okay, I've got a structure and a system and it's all based on logic and you do this and you do that. And I'm the kind fatherly figure who's going to give you this guidance in this structured way. And that's not me. So when I did go through the transition and I started working as a counselor as a woman, I found that counseling became so much easier and more natural for me. And I was able to pour forth my empathy and my compassion and my nurturing qualities in a way that I wasn't able to do before. And I saw the resonance in this, as with the myth of Guanyin, this goddess, this bodhisattva of compassion. And so, in addition, having lived as a male for many years, I have the experience of the memory of that. And I know what men go through. I know how much they are just under this tremendous pressure to just not have emotions, unless it's anger sometimes, so you can fight, and to not cry, and to be stoic, and to just push through this tremendous pressure, this tremendous limitation of what you can be in the world, what you can wear, how you can express yourself. So I've had that experience, so I can draw on that empathy as well in the crossing of the threshold.
Yeah. What a fascinating experience. I'm hearing that horrible echo again. Maybe I'll be able to edit it out.
I hope so. I don't hear it on my side. So.
You also draw on the resource of Jungian, of Carl Jung and Jungian psychology, and the hero's myth as articulated by Joseph Campbell. That's the name. So, So you find a lot of support there, and you also there are parts that just don't fit for you. So, talk about that a little bit.
I will. It's really the same dynamic as both Jung and Campbell coming from 100 years ago or so in a deeply patriarchal society with this deep discomfort around queer sexuality, but sexuality just in general. And I got deeply into Joseph Campbell while I was in China, just right around the time of my Guanyin experience. And I spent the next few years just devouring everything I could get my hands on from him. Not just through the hero's journey, but just his overview and the depth of his insight about the integration of all world cultures, world mythologies, and religions. And I knew that he was drawing from Jung. And when I went into my counseling program, I became naturally drawn to Jung because, again, Jung's psychology is shamanistic. It is archetypical. It is to do with spirituality. It is to do with art. It is to do with these forms that are beyond the material that inform our lives. And that's what mythology is about too. And that's why Campbell and Jung were also a close fit. But right away, as I discovered this idea of the anima and the animus from Jung, I recognized, like, at this time, I still had like sort of a non-identification with gender. And I didn't really feel like I was male at the time or female. I just felt like I was playing the role of a male for society. And so here he's saying, you know, you're either male or you're female. And if you're male, you have an anima, and if you're female, you have an animus, and they're connected with your sexuality and your romantic attraction and all of this content. And it became very clear to me, well, what about people who are transgender? What about people who are lesbian, gay? And I think I rose my hand in class and I said, you know, I think my immediate thing was, I think all of us have an anima and an animus. I don't think it's just one or the other. And then I was basically shut down by my instructor. Well, that's not the theory. That's not the theory of Jung. Because I guess the traditional theory was that you had a shadow of your same gender, and then either an anima or animus of the opposite gender. And I believe that in the years since Jung's death, as Jungians have been integrating queer identities into the practice, you know, one way to do that is the solution I intuitively arrived at, which is to just say, well, each of us has an anima and an animus, and what our sexuality is attached to and what our identity is attached to can vary tremendously, just depending on who we are. But I had found that through Joseph Campbell operating in earlier times, when this had not really been drawn out of Jung, where it was still in the original form, that he also, and others besides Campbell, and I'm not sure about Jung himself, I haven't actually read anything about his specific ideas about this, but the system can be used to pathologize queer identities, insofar as if your animus system is not integrated properly, then you can go into a gay experience, or you can go into a transgender experience, and it's really a function of you just not figuring out how to integrate this properly. So that was where I kind of reached a block and felt like I'm not finding something that incorporates my experience of gender and sexuality into a system. Whereas with the Joseph Campbell system in general, I mean, really it was partially an inspiration of that system, of a hero's journey, that helped inspire me in a place where there are no paths. As Joseph Campbell says, this journey, and he calls it like the Grail quest, right? Going after the truth of your heart starts in the dark forest where there's no path and no way. And if you have a teacher who has a path for you, it's not your path. And so I took heart from that. I was like, Campbell doesn't have a path for me because I'm really on the journey. And a teacher can help give you pointers on the way, but the path has got to be your own. And it's got to be where it's darkest and where there's no path. And so that inspiration really was assisting me in accessing my courage in going through this transition.
You know, I think this might be a really great place for us to wrap up.
Okay.
With that statement, you know,
Yeah.
that you have to find your own path. And we have this tendency to want to deify teachers, gurus, etc., and they always end up having clay feet because it's not really ultimately our path.
Right. I think there's one more thing I would like to just mention real quick, which is that part of what I wanted to do in having this conversation with you is really emphasize that queer spirituality and transgender spirituality as a subset of that is something I want to rehabilitate as something to give anyone spiritual guidance, not just trans or queer people, and not as an afterthought of a church that's like, okay, yeah, we'll let you in our doors, but really as a principle of crossing the threshold of pairs of opposites and coming into an understanding of your soul, and really understanding the soul as being a guide, as something that's real, that can really guide you and guide the purpose that you have here in this material world. And I think that that's something in both areas that trans people and cisgender queer people as well. Really, if for those of us spiritually inclined, we have a lot to offer everyone. And that goes for straight people and anybody else as well. So wanted to leave with that note.
Yeah, that's a wonderful message. And Raelle Kaia, I want to thank you for choosing Shrink Wrap Radio as a vehicle to help get that message out, for being my guest today.
Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me onto this vehicle.